We are so honored to have such a wonderful panel with us today to talk about how to find funding in Asia. Most often, when people talk about trying to find funding and fundraising, they work in one of the areas: entrepreneurship, consulting, or research, and sometimes multiples of those. And so we have a panel with one person from at least one of those areas to talk with us today. And so I it over to them for a brief introduction. Durga is the founder of AeroNeuro. So welcome, Durga.
Hi. Quick introduction about myself. I'm actually a professional sportsman, played cricket at the national level in India, and then I captained the US team for several years. Played the amateur golf circuit and also took up sailing when kind of cricket started taking a backseat as I grew older. And so now I compete in sailing. So it's always been a part of my life, and you will find out when I, talk a little bit later about entrepreneurship, how I connected to and how it helped me, and hopefully it'll help you too. Aeronero is something that I started in what I call the third stage of my life. My first stage was survival. Became an entrepreneur when I was only 14 because of circumstance. I didn't choose it. And the second stage, I was mostly in tech in the Valley, lived there for about 25, 28 years, and did lots of technology. And I created security for myself, my family, and those around me. I came to the third stage and I really wanted to leave an impact. I wanted to do something that made a difference in other people's lives. And that's how I looked for a big problem and got into water. And now we all know it's not a small problem, it's a global problem. And so that's what I'm doing now. So Aeronero specifically focuses on water from air because it's a great source. It's an abundant source and a source that's not going to be depleted at any time because even 2% of atmospheric moisture is enough to serve the entire population's drinking water needs. But yet we wait for it to hit the ground and then we dig and waste and treat and transport and everything that you all know. So at some point, if I can talk a little bit more about it, or if you have questions more about that company or the technology we use, I'm happy to share that. But I think I'll stop at my introduction for the moment and let the other speakers, my other fellow panelists, talk about themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Durga. And yes, I agree. Water is an incredibly complex and big challenge locally, globally, everywhere. So I'm so glad that you got into it from there. Veena, I'd love to let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Veena Srinivasan. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization called Well Labs. That Well stands for Water, Environment, Land and Livelihoods, but of course the pun is intended because well is also groundwater, which is most of India's water supply, both for irrigation and drinking, as well as wellness, because human well-being, at the end of the day, we're really talking about negotiating between what humans use to advance economic growth, human well-being, but then what's left for the environment to support life's preserving processes. Now, I started like many of you as a researcher. Much of my career was in writing academic papers. Although I started many years ago, 20 years ago, in the energy sector, and I worked for a little bit in consulting as with the Big Four, as well as in mergers and acquisitions with a big energy firm. But I very quickly realized that my passion and interest and aptitude really lied in public innovation. And I realized there was too much oil and gas domination in the energy sector. And I ended up moving to water about 20 years ago, first with the Pacific Institute, then with my PhD and postdoc at Stanford. And then when I moved back to India with ITRI, and then currently where I am right now. What I realized when I started Well Labs was I'd spent 10 years writing papers, maybe winning awards for them, and nothing was changing. I mean, we were sitting there, the drought was as bad, the flood was as bad, and nothing was moving. And you start having these feelings of guilt because if you're working in a privately funded research institution, you're realizing that I literally call it the starving baby paradox, where money is being given to you to do research and innovation, but that money would have literally been spent feeding starving orphans if you hadn't been doing it. And so I felt a real responsibility to make my research count. And that's when we started Well Labs as a research and innovation center to say, not just research to end in a report, but research to actually transform systems. And we don't work on small problems, we try to work on large systemic problems and move them. But more when we chat. Back to you, Catherine.
That's wonderful, Veena. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mahak, the founder of All Bits Count.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you very much, everyone. Hi, everyone. This is Mahak Agrawal signing in from Delhi right now. And I think like similar to Veena and Durga, I think, or maybe like anybody else in the impact space, like the journey hasn't been linear. It's been a bit of iteration. So I started off as an urban planner, hardcore working on water and sanitation infrastructure, among other things that, urban and city designers do. And then I went on to more of policy negotiations for urban sustainability, climate action, particularly from India to more of Western Europe and Indonesia. And then that from there in transition more into industrial decarbonization when I moved to US in the peak of the pandemic, and also been working on like heading climate campaigns across different parts of the world. Currently, in September 2024, I launched All Bits Count as an initiative and creative consultancy at the United Nations during New York Climate Week. What it simply tries to do is that in this entire world where we are constantly talking about big, bold investments and big, bold solutions, we are sort of forgetting the small systemic changes that can be done at not just an individual level, but also at an institutional, at a city, at a regional level to drive positive impact. So what All Bits Count tries to do is highlight and simplify the science of sustainability, science of climate change, to break it down into bite-sized solutions that are implementable, that are actionable, and that are ultimately impactful. So we work with different governments, we work with different research institutions all over the world, not just in India right now. And so far, we have delivered some really impactful projects, even in this short time since launch, with the City of Amsterdam, with the University of Exeter, with the British Council, and really looking forward to driving the change further on, even if the current environment seems a bit tough. And beyond All Bits Count, I also sit on the steering board of ITA Committee on Underground Space, which is an organization that works on underground space all over the world. And I particularly head the portfolio on climate adaptation. So I work on the water and sanitation sector right now, not just as, a WASH consultant in the past life, but more as a climate person who's working on the WASH sector.
Thanks, Mahak.
On that note, I would give it back to you, Catherine.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to have to, I'm looking at the time and I'm seeing the list of questions that we have. We had a lot of questions from pre-registration, which is great. So I will try to keep us to time today because I'm about to ask you all what I think are really interesting questions that we could spend 15 minutes on each. So I will gently tell you when we're at 5. But one of the things that's interesting from the first poll that we did today, right, was it was multiple choice because we recognize, as the 3 of you said, this isn't just one piece. A lot of people do research and consulting, or they do research and entrepreneurship. They do consulting and entrepreneurship. Like, you don't find very many people that are just perfectly siloed, and so many people are interested in tapping into multiple one of those. So we had that be multiple choice. So that's why you had 71% people interested in research and 36% interested in entrepreneurship and 36% interested in consulting. And I don't know if anyone else took a second and thought, it's more than 100%. So we've got a lot of people in the audience today as well that are really interested in that overlap. I'll switch up the order. So Veena, I'd like to start with you. As a researcher, I know that there's always this conversation among researchers of the struggle to find funding. And it's easy to think that others have this secret track, that it's easy for them and it's hard for you as an individual. And I once spoke to a researcher who was doing very well in the US, and she said that it took her 42 grant applications to get funding for her research, which shocked the audience of researchers that she was talking to. So what do you think are some critical insights to keep in mind during this process, and how many, what's your experience? How many times does it take to often get that kind of PI principal investigator level funding? Please share with us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that example, because I think it's important for people to see that when people have succeeded, it's because they've tried hard and tried long, right? And there's no shame in kind of failure, and you got to keep trying. But I think let's kind of break that down into some things that you can do to kind of see, can you increase your odds of success? And we have to understand that there is a background kind of movement around how funding is moving, which we can't control. We know what's happened in recent weeks. I'm sure many of people in this room are kind of hurting from suddenly having funding yanked from them. So I would say a few different things. Firstly, to kind of look broadly beyond your traditional forms of funding. In India, there's a big CSR law which requires corporates to spend, even though that money might not exactly go into research. We've actually managed to get small amounts of that money to be done in research as knowledge partners to implementation organizations. So that's one way that we've gone, where we said it's not just research, but it's research with implementation, but we're the research partner, right? So that's one way to do it, to kind of broaden where you're looking for money and not keep applying to the same one exact NSF program or whatever else your country's national research funding program is. I think the second thing I think that's important to do is to kind of understand the politics of different grants. So, like for example, when you look at some of these very very large, multilateral, global, RFPs, often it's a rigged game in some way, in the sense that even before the grant, I was told for one grant that even before the grant call went out, it's already clear that it's going to go to only one of these two or three organizations, and that's already kind of been pre-decided, because they've been in the talks for a long time. So it doesn't mean that you're blindly applying to these grants without understanding and talking to people about, wait, how do these grants actually happen? What's the process? Who's the decision? Is it really like, do I really have a 1 in 100 shot if 100 people are applying, or is it really zero because it's only 2 of those 100 people are even under any serious consideration? And so that happens a lot with these very very large multilateral global grants. Not always. There are a lot which are very transparent and very double blind and properly done, but it's important to understand which is which, so you're not kind of just spinning your wheels. The second point, so the first point is basically look beyond what you're looking at and understand the politics of the grant that you're applying for. The second thing I'd like to talk about is to think about, if you're applying for 42 grants, you can only do that if somebody is supporting you financially, right? That doesn't apply to the vast majority of the world. We all have families to support and bills to pay and rent, rent bills to be paid at the end of the month, which means that we can't afford to be pursuing our dreams necessarily if they happen to be that difficult and ambitious. So one way that people have talked about thinking about this is to take a portfolio approach to your goals, to say, look, I know that I want to do this one big ambitious thing. It's not going to be easy to get funding, but I'm going to keep chipping away with it at 20-25% of my time. But this is the other 5 or 6 things that I can do alongside that are going to build the muscles that I need, so that when I ultimately get that grant, I know how to do it. And I would say that as somebody who's a founder but was previously a researcher, there's a lot of skills that we as researchers are never taught, right? We're never taught how to communicate science really well, that Mahak talked about. We're never taught about how to do really, really solid financial management the way I'm sure private sector organizations like Durga does. We're never taught about how do you manage finances so that you're actually setting aside money, you're provisioning correctly, all of this stuff. All of these are skills to build. So if you take a portfolio approach to your life, rather than a very, very narrow and ambitious goal and keep trying to hit at it, you're likely to kind of actually get there. The third thing I would think of, which is a major problem with researchers, is often we are very, what I would call inside out. You're kind of so buried in this very deep thing that you're trying to pursue that you're not necessarily understanding that the rest of the world doesn't either care about that question, or they care about an adjacent question, so on and so forth. And this is one of the biggest problems that I've seen with researchers, that they are not enough user friendly, if you want to call it that. They're not paying attention to what's my use case for this research, who cares about this, why do they care about it, who would want to pay for this information. As you move from fundamental research to applied research to consulting, having that conversation becomes more and more and more important. And it is unbelievable to me how many researchers don't have a good calibration of why does anybody care about this question I'm asking. And just stop to ask people, hey, you're working on this, you seem to have this program that's failing, what are you interested in? So going and having a few conversations about understanding what people with money and budgets to spend are interested in might help you then recalibrate what it is that you need to, how it is that you should shift your position and ask questions differently. I'll stop
That's
there.
perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfectly timed, exactly 5 minutes. Thank you, Veena. And those are some really great points. And I think especially, I love that idea of the portfolio approach and just recognizing that when we want to do any of these 3 things, maybe you're a consultant wanting to move into research, got a need for those new skills. Durga, as an entrepreneur, I know you've mentored others and shared your experiences. So what are the top 2 or 3 insights that you share with your mentees when someone is trying to come to you to make an entrepreneurship venture a success?
Thank you, Catherine. So yeah, the interesting question, because when I started my life as an entrepreneur, when I was about close to 13, between 13 and 14 years of age, it was by circumstance. My father had an accident. We lost everything. We were on the streets, and I just happened to mention that I will try and do something to help the family, and he said, "Why not now?" And I said, "Well, I don't know anything. I'm still in school. Don't have access to money. I don't even have an idea. But I had a desire to help. I had a desire to make a difference." Right. And so that's how I started as an entrepreneur. Figured out I played cricket, I would start a sports shop. So it was the easiest thing I could get a handle on. As life changed and I grew, I think I took up entrepreneurship and I embraced it. And I didn't look at it as something, a circumstance, but something that I wanted to inculcate into my life. So through that journey, I've started asking some questions to those I mentor, to ask them, the first question is, I mean, many of you may be entrepreneurs here, maybe you're thinking of being an entrepreneur. I think you should ask yourself, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? What, is it to make money? Is it like my situation where I had no choice? I had to find some idea and get going because I can't get a job. I can't, no one's going to hire me, but I need to survive. I have to look after my family. Is that's what's driving you to find an idea or to get a business of your own going? It's important to understand that. Or are you trying to be an entrepreneur because you want to create change? You want to create value. You want to create wealth over long term. It's very important to ask yourself this question honestly, because they are very 2 different paths. One path expects you to come up with ideas that will help you also survive. And the other path you may not see money in a long time, but you will eventually, if you persevere and keep staying on that path, you will create value, not just for yourself, but for others as well. And eventually wealth will follow. It's a very important question to ask of oneself. The other part of this is, have you assessed the requirements of what it takes to be an entrepreneur? And if you're really a fit, because to be an entrepreneur, many times when I've spoken to young entrepreneurs here, they say, well, I want to be free. I want to build my own business. I don't want to work in a corporate environment, follow some rules. I think I can create more on my own. And that is just a bad answer, because as an entrepreneur, you will realize, and many of you who are already on the path and already are facing challenges will, agree with me, that to be an entrepreneur is basically tying yourself up to several stakeholders. You are not free. You will never be free. It's not just your customers. It's not just your investors. It's your team. It's their families. It's your customers' families, yourself. You're answerable to so many kinds of people that you might actually wish to just not be an entrepreneur and go back to a safe corporate job where you're in a silo doing a specific task and everyone else is responsible for what they're doing, and you can go home at 6 p.m. and be with your family. Because it's as an entrepreneur, you have to understand you don't have the ability or the freedom to say, I need time for family work balance. There is no family work balance. You just have to think of your idea is your baby. That is your family. And now there are many people who are relying on your baby to grow well. And so you have to consider that as well. So that's the first question. Why are you an entrepreneur? And do you have all the credentials required to be an entrepreneur to last the journey? The second thing that I'd like to share with most mentors is, what is the idea, right? Is it because you came up with this idea because you want to create a change? Or is it because someone else was doing it and you thought, that's pretty cool, even I can do it? I too got that education. I think there's enough of a market, for me to be another player in this space, right? Or is it because you thought, hey, it's an idea that makes money, right? And again, the idea itself and how you approach that idea and the reason for why you picked on that particular idea. And when you talk about water, as we're talking about, you can take it up. The reason I took up Aeronero is because I wanted to leave an impact and I wanted someone to remember me when I died, saying she changed our life. She brought a solution that gave me water security, water independence. And that gives me a lot of passion to continue no matter what the odds are, right? If I was thinking about, oh, I have to do this, I'd like to create an impact, but I also need to feed my family, I have to look after things, then my idea may change because then I'll want to make a quick fit product that I can get out of the market soon, right? I will not take the path that Veena took, which is research and, working on long-term sustainable solutions that actually impact over time. These are not things that just get fixed and done overnight. So that is also very, very important to consider. Where is the idea coming from? What was the premise of the idea? Where was it emanating from, right? And how are you structuring it in your head, in your life, in your mind to figure out what you want to do? And the last point I want to leave, and I know I'm running out of time, is the team. When you build any product, any idea, any company, you have to think of 3 or 4 things, which is very important. We can talk about it later. One is, don't be a solo player. You need a team. You need to de-risk the model if you need to raise money. Otherwise, you're going to find it very hard to find investors. You have to have a big enough TAM, addressable market, so that you can still get a small piece of it and still build a sustainable business. You have to create a moat which makes you different from others in the space so that you can show that you have a value proposition that is sustainable. And last but not least, as an entrepreneur, you have to be able to persevere through all of those challenges. Right. So I'm going to stop here because I think I've just reached my time.
You have. Perfect. Thank you. That's wonderful, Durga, and a lot of really, really insightful questions for people to take home and think about. Mahak, I want to move to you. You've consulted for a range of incredible clients, and for a lot of people who are starting off in consulting, the first question is, how do I get my first client? So can you share a bit about what has and hasn't worked for you? Thanks.
Yes, happy to. And I will limit myself to 5 or maybe even less than that. So I would say, I have consulted with governments, I have consulted with multilaterals as well within India and beyond India in the wash sector. And right now, with Allbits being a creative consultancy and a fairly new one, I think the hardest part about getting the first client wasn't actually getting the clients, but proving to myself that, yes, I am ready to bring in clients. Having that validation that you have that credibility, you have that access, that you can do it. I think that's the starting point. So what really worked for me was, first, don't wait to be ready in a holistic sense. Start off with offering your expertise, your experience to, say, NGOs, to small businesses, to local governments, because sometimes your first client might just be a pilot project, but it helps you get your foot in the door. Second, I would say that be ridiculously clear on what you have to offer. So, I could go, and I think it was sort of a brutal reminder and reality check for me in the beginning, was that I went on to saying that we are offering climate consultancy. But then when you start clarifying what the actual value proposition is, and in a simplified manner, so I changed my stance from, offering not climate consultancy, but say helping cities reduce emissions by optimizing XYZ policies, whether it's transport policies or water and sanitation policies. So the clearer you are, the easier it is for someone to say that, oh, I need this person. I know that this is the person, or this is the sort of consultant that can help you achieve what you aspire. And third would be, especially if you are a new consultant, if you're a fresh consultant, or if you're a recently organized consultancy as an organization, leverage your warm networks, because you need to tell everyone what you know, what you do, because sometimes your next opportunity could be probably hiding in your emails, in your phone books, in your contact list, or even sometimes in your LinkedIn DMs. So, you have to leverage your network. Don't just start chasing fundraising, or don't just start chasing grants as a first-time consultant. I think start leveraging your networks, especially as a first-time consultant. And also, just to highlight things that did not work out. One, I thought, like, in the current digital environment, you need to have a social presence first. You have to have a digital presence. I was advised by a lot of really senior advisors that first develop your, really aesthetically pleasing website. I think that doesn't work if you're looking for a first-time consulting job or starting a new consulting organization. Second, getting stuck in like endless strategy planning, that doesn't work either, because you tend to lose out on the opportunities that are already there. And third would be thinking that clients will come to you simply because you exist, because they won't. You have to be proactive by, as I mentioned, the 3 key strategies. And another thing that I particularly feel, especially in the current, funding market, or the market that was there between September to December 2024, was that if you are a startup, if you are a new creative, just a new consultancy, everyone, whether it's, venture capitalists, whether it's investors, they will advise you to develop a pitch deck and then start first and foremost with securing funds, developing a strong fundraising strategy, reaching out to high net income professionals, just getting that first bulk of money in and then doing the work. I don't think you should do that, because in my experience, I think if you start working, money comes, and then you can go, or like, if you're like 2 or 3 years into your consulting venture, then you can start raising funds based on what you have already delivered, rather than going backwards and start raising funds and then plan your deliverables accordingly. So I think that's just how I would say, getting that first client as an independent consultant or as a consulting organization has worked out for me.
That's really great, Mahak. Thank you. And I think that that's right? One of the commonalities I'm hearing from all 3 of you is just get out there, start talking to people. Don't just kind of think that putting something up online or writing a single research paper or just creating a website about your venture is going to be enough. You have to find the people. They're not going to just come to you. So I love that. Now, we want to get to the interactive part of this session. And so one of the things that we've done is we've created a poll, and poll 2 can launch now. And this poll is filled with questions from pre-registration, or registration. So when people registered, we asked them for their top questions for this panel. And what we're asking now is that all of the live participants vote about which question you want answered the most. And then I'll ask at least the top 2 questions of that. But please feel free to go ahead and start putting your questions for our amazing panel in the chat. No need to wait. Please go ahead and put those in. The earlier you ask your question, the more likely it is that we'll be able to get to it. And I know that we do have some additional registration questions beyond this poll. So we'll keep going with those as well. All right, we're going to give a little bit longer. I know there are 5 questions in the poll, and so I'll just give you 1 more minute. I see a lot of voting, but it is hard to decide. I don't know which one I would vote for. There's a tie for first place right now. I just need a couple of more people to vote so that we can make sure we have a clear first place winner. Okay, I'll close the poll in 10 seconds. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll end poll 2. Thank you to everyone who could decide which one to vote on. We have 3 in first place. So that's fine. We'll get to all of those. One of them is really interesting because I think that we get a lot of conversations around urban water issues because it's very clear that there are a lot of organizations that are funding urban, but it is harder to get support for rural. So the question that we'll start with is, how do I assess funding to develop a water or wash project in my rural community? How do I find the resources for that? So I'll open that up to the whole panel and see if anybody wants to jump in to how to go about focusing on a rural community.
I can take that to start.
Please, Durga.
Yeah, so the question was how to assess funding to develop a water wash project in my rural community. And as you said, Catherine, rightly so, rural communities find it harder to get funding than urban communities, because obviously the amount of funds available in rural areas is difficult. But there is an answer. There are organizations like the Rotary International, the Lions, the Round Table, several of these organizations, and I am part of the Rotary, and we have several clubs in our district. And WASH is a very big sector, and I actually helped create what is called the Water Mission in our district, and we look at a holistic approach to water solutions. And ideally, we like to offer it in rural areas, or in government schools, or in government hospitals that don't have access to money. And the way it works is you approach any of the Rotary or any of these organizations with the project that you have in mind and the community that is going to be impacted, and they like to see larger impact. And then what they do is they look at the kind of money you need. They bring in all of their clubs and the district to participate with it. And then they can, if it's large enough, they actually go and they get an additional grant from the district, and then they get an international grant to substantiate it as well. So you can go, as I've seen projects that we have done that are $200,000, $300,000, and I've seen projects that are $10,000, right? So it can be as small or as large as that, but you would need to go to them with a clear plan of action of what is the problem and what is the impact that it'll have if you have if you implement a solution, and what are the solutions that you're looking to implement. And then I'm happy, of course, to connect any of you to any of the organizations anywhere in the world. As you know, many of these organizations are international, and so we all have connections across the world. So that's where I would say you can look for very quick funding.
That's a really great insight. Thank you so much, Durga. I will go ahead and go to the next one in the interest of time. Mahak, we were talking about consulting, so there was a lot of interest in, is there stability in doing consultancy as a job? It's clearly working well for you. And what factors to consider if you're interested, and are there any drawbacks? And Veena, just be thinking about this question because I'm going to come to you next. I know you did some consulting. So Mahak.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think consulting in general, or I think right now any professional, it's really uncertain, to be honest. But if you really want to build stability, it's only as good as you create it. So, it in like the world of consulting, it's a strange thing to say, but consulting could be a feast or famine until you build a system. So for me, what has worked and what I have realized from past experiences working as a consultant for others as well is that it's only stable if you build diverse income streams. So you really have to focus on mixing sort of like long-term retainers with short-term projects. And a few factors, or maybe top 3 factors that I would say that you need to consider if you are leading that consulting organization or if you are the lead consultant, is to understand if you're good at managing yourself. Because if there's no boss above you, means that no one is telling you what to do, and sometimes that can get a bit messy. Second, can you handle unpredictability? Because in the world of consultancy, 1 month could be really, really a thriving month, but then the next month or the next few months could be that you feel like you're on the weeds. So you have to manage that unpredictability accordingly and plan for it proactively. The third one would be that you have to be clear that you need to have a financial cushion, because as I said, the cash flow can be really erratic. So you have to plan for the dry months, not just for yourself, but for your team. Like your team needs to be priority rather than you as the consulting head in yourself. The other thing now that, I'm not working as a consultant in another organization, but leading my own consultancy, is that there are various drawbacks because you have to wear, I think, like too many hats. You're marketing, you're managing the finances, you're managing the contracts. So until you can hire help, you have to balance the trade-offs, which would be like your own personal freedom, your impact, and also what could be the growth potential if you were not, wearing all these very different hats while trying to maintain or, manage that level of or sense of stability.
Oh, that's really good. Veena, anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, no, those were really good points. And let me add a couple more. One, I'm going to talk, I think people don't think enough about working capital because sometimes you don't often get paid in the beginning and when you're just starting out, especially if you get a large project that is basically saying we'll only pay you on delivery, then how are you going to pay people in the interim? And just thinking through that. Similarly, I think provisioning, one problem that a lot of consulting organizations don't do, for example, is to provision money for like maternity leave, that sort of thing, which you're barely keeping away, your head above. But I've had cases where somebody's husband suddenly died, right? And then you suddenly have to figure out, you can't fire them the next day, but suddenly you don't have money because they're not billing to a project anymore. And figuring out how you created small cushions and maintaining discipline about, like, as a consulting head of a consulting organization, to make sure that you're able to smooth that sort of thing where you set aside little cushions. The third thing I would say is cautionary to something to worry about is how creditworthy is the organization for whom you're doing consulting. Government in India is notorious for making you do a large project and then just shrugging and saying, sorry, we're not going to pay you. And we ran into this problem recently where we had a work order. It's a very small project because I was told the very first day, I was told, don't take large government projects. You can't handle it. You don't know how to play the government game, right? So, but in this case, we were trying to do large systemic change. There was a very, very small amount of work that we agreed to do with government. Most of it we get grant funded or philanthropically funded in our case. But after we did it, none of the money actually came to us. We worked for free, meaning our time was paid for by a philanthropic donor, but we had to pay some interns and stuff. And at the end of it, we were asked for a bribe, and then to get that tiny amount of money out, and then we just said, forget it, we'll take the loss. And so I'm just saying, be really careful about understanding the game about how payments actually get processed, and then make sure that what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and then read contracts really carefully. Because one problem I've had in the past is there was an ambiguity in one of the clauses, and the person ended up expecting us to do way more than what we had verbally committed to, and because they had not committed to their boss about what they were actually saying. And that's happened several times. You can get a bad client, right? Where the client is not clear and they actually either lie or they over communicated to their bosses, and suddenly they're now pushing you to do all kinds of stuff. So these are the additional things I would add about how to be really be a little careful, about.
Oh, those are really good points. So it is hard to believe this, but we're almost at time. So I do want to get to one of the live questions that has come through, and I'm going to shorten it and open it to all three of you because I think it is really relevant. So this is someone who has several degrees in academic degrees. So, think masters and water engineering and MBA, that kind of level of it. And they've done academic research and they're interested in moving on to something more practical, particularly of use to poor societies. And Veena, earlier you were discussing the challenges of how research doesn't immediately solve the problem. Durga, you've been talking a lot about entrepreneurship ventures that can really make a difference. So I think this is really relevant to all three of you. But what are your thoughts on how to make that kind of research or startup work that could really benefit the poor communities, but in a way that's not too scientific or too technical? And I'll just open the floor up, and whoever would like to jump in first can, but really quick because we're running out
All
of time.
right, I'll jump in really quickly. I would say that it's a fairly simple principle, which is to listen deeply to what people want. Because when you're trying to service others, often we're going and saying we want to give you all of the stuff and not what do you want. And I think whether it's entrepreneurship, whether it's nonprofit, whether it's consulting, all three, you have to actually be customer focused or client focused. And if you start with that and say, what value would this person derive from the set of skills I have? Eventually you're going to arrive at something that somebody will pay you for. That's what.
My 2 cents is, given the background of the person who asked this question with multiple degrees and looking at what else to do, and maybe getting funding for research is not the easiest path, is decide if you want to be an entrepreneur. I mean, you don't need to start it on your own. I mean, I have several openings if you're interested, but look at other startups, say like myself in this space, right? We're all constantly looking for talent. So you can join a startup that's of interest to you if they're working in the space that interests you, or choose to start one yourself. Either way, just know the challenges in both. Starting on your own has its own pitfalls, as I mentioned earlier, but working with somebody might give you that initial push to get started. Of course, it's not your own, but then it would set the base for you to eventually maybe kind of migrate into something on your own as well.
And I think that suggestion also goes back to the comment about building new skills, right? So starting with a startup that already exists, where you've got a team that maybe has the skills that you don't have. We've talked about the importance of teams, so it feels like a really good suggestion, Durga. Mahak, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just one last point. So what Veena mentioned, like, listen to the community, that helps you work on a research question that's actually responding to the problem on the ground. And then what Durga mentioned, that, you need to look at it from a multidisciplinary perspective, because as we said at the onset, water and sanitation is not a simple problem. It's a complex problem at all levels. But at the end of the day, no matter what kind of research or what kind of problem you're solving, you need to translate into a manner that is relatable to the client that you're working with, that is relatable to the population or the community that you're working for. Because until and unless you can break down that science into understandable bits, it's not going to work, whether it's from a value proposition perspective or just from a relatability perspective. You have to simplify it, because as scientists, as project managers, we sometimes forget the value of communication. And I think that's really, really important if you want to translate your research into actual impact on ground.
I know we had originally planned to do a final comments, but I will be honest with you. I think you've just done that. Those really feel like you've pulled on the key points of everything we've talked about, from building new skills and teamwork, the value of communication, really listening and talking to other people and getting outside of whether it's a research venture, an entrepreneur venture. You get so siloed on like, this is the problem and this is the thing, and being able to take yourself out of that is all really wonderful. So I'd love to just thank our panelists again. You've been incredible. This has been an amazing and really energizing conversation.